Duvid here. We are live with my second installment of books that changed my life. So last week, my second week, I started with a generic chronological overview of books from my youth till today, of all sorts of books um, that made a huge impact on my life from Think Like a Grandmaster that I'd read in grade school, even before my bar mitzvah, to beat the dealer Ed Thorpe that got me thinking into probability and God forbid thinking that I could win at gambling and blackjack, and but it affected my life in terms of probabilistic thinking and the concept of betting big when the odds are in your favor, betting small when the odds are against you. You definitely impactful on me. And then my trip to Israel and studying in yeshiva and a handful of 5 Jewish books I listed that really changed the way I look at things. And then day trading and some more spiritual books and to Culture of Critique, the most recent. And I mentioned Radhanath Swami, The Journey Home. So actually, for whatever reason, Antariksha Das, Eric Wayne Crosley, has my book of the journey home, Radhanath Swami, and I have an autographed copy. So I have here The Journey Within, which is the second book in the series. But I have The Journey Home, and I've read a lot more books that are on my shelf because thank God I constantly read. I've read books online or I've given books away. And the only time I never did with Judaism, the only time I'd ever done was with ISKCON and Harinam Sankirtan, where I set books out on the street. And just so people could see, I'm using 2 computers here, but let's do a screen share of called like my history with ISKCON. So I mentioned in my first stream that I had met Radhanath Swami. I used to go to ISKCON. I had received ISKCON literature on the subway. I lived in the Lower East Side and went to the Brooklyn Temple and to the Manhattan Temple. I like the chanting and spiritual conversations, mostly the prasad, the food, vegetarian food. But certainly I enjoyed talking with the devotees and having spiritual conversations, and took it seriously, but never considered myself doing it. Just like I lived in the Lower East Side. I thought it was cool. I thought it was nice that there were people that are interested in spirituality and learn about Bhagavad Gita and reincarnation. But I never considered doing it myself. And but when Radhanath Swami came to the Brooklyn Temple for an event, I went there and I waited in line and I introduced myself afterwards. I got a blessing. And then when I came back to Detroit, I looked up the Hare Krishna Temple. I believe I'd been there younger, actually, possibly with Ben Feingold, the chess player, and Jaya Krishna Das, Jay Whitehead, the famous international chess master that came to Detroit and won a chess tournament wearing dhoti, Hare Krishna renunciate garb. But I looked up the address of the temple and I went down. And actually, yesterday there was the Gorvunda Hill. The first time I went, maybe close to 10 years ago, where I went to the event and right when I came back to Detroit. So I may have already been enrolled in University of Michigan. I was a student in University of Michigan at the time, and as I mentioned, Shamananda Das, I went, I said chanting, it was nice, and then Shamananda Das, where I was going to leave, said, "Do you honor prasad?" And then I was kind of kosher, but I was like, okay, vegetarian, I'll eat the prasad. I eat vegetarian food at Indian restaurants sometimes, and I started speaking first Shamananda Das, the German devotee who's still in Detroit, good man, good family, and then others, and I'm going to go through all of my books. So I'll probably go for like 2 hours today, just talk through a little bit, but one of the first books I got that I saw there was Proof of Vedic Culture's Global Existence, and I'm gonna plug in my other camera so I have it set up that I'll be able to show this better. But one of the first books I bought, the chairman of the board, uh, Stephen Knapp's Sri Nandanandana, and it just looked like a really interesting book, Proof of Vedic Culture's Global Existence. And I'd been reading a lot about Freemasonry, and I kind of thought that, yeah, Vedic culture probably does pervade the world. It probably does source from India, and so this was in the first literature, and it was interesting. I came back a week or two later, and I bought the book, and I was telling someone how excited I was to read the book, and it happened. I was sitting right next to Sri Nandanandana, and he was like, "Oh, that's Stephen Knapp. That's Stephen Knapp right there." And I spoke with him, and I ended up, I'll show you soon. I have almost all of Sri Nandanandana's books, over 25 books, and but so I started going to the ISKCON temple regularly. I was doing interfaith with Rabbi Dorit, and I got Antariksha Das into the interfaith, and I started chanting. I started singing Harinam. I saw some real truth and beauty in it, and I was inspired by Radhanath Swami's The Journey Home, and so you could see. Uh, now famous devotee Deva Madhava Das. I was there when he first came to the temple, and before he, knew that he was going to be interested in doing this, and we went and did Harinam a few times, and I have these videos, and the Ann Arbor art fair. So, not Natabara Grangadas, who now is a famous devotee in New York, and Sri Hari Siddharth, who's now a famous devotee. They were U of M students, and I used to go and put out books. I was the one who put out books because I'm a intellectual person, and I read a lot. And think I had money, so I was able to afford to buy books. And so I had books, and I had a car, so I bought the books and I put them out. And so we did a lot of Harinams, and a lot of times I was the one who put out the books, but not to sell. That like eventually they all got initiated and got serious into book distribution, and it was kind of sectarian. So I stopped doing that with them. But you can see on my channel a whole bunch of Harinams, and there's some very powerful books, and even to so to say, Siddhari, not to borrow Garanga Das, I was one of the first person who showed them ISKCON literature, and I'll show you the books I showed them because the point is books that changed my life. So just take off the screen share, but you can check out my channel. You can see a lot of Harinam, but and your videos, Detroit ISKCON. But just to mention that for a few years, Royal Oak, Ann Arbor, I was a founding member of the Bhakti Yoga Society of University of Michigan with Uma Devadasi, who ended up marrying a local man and now lives here permanently in Ypsilanti. And we had Harinam, and I helped with book distribution, and then we eventually, like, there was dispute because it's sectarian. So like I had a certain angle to it, and I didn't get initiated, and I had my own theories and thoughts on it that are different than the path of the people who went getting initiated. So after a certain point, when they all got initiated and became official members, they stopped even inviting me, and you had their own take on it. And so my take on it is not an official ISKCON take, although I would say I have better books than them. I have almost all the books that they sell in the Detroit Temple and more. Even if you go to ISKCON Farmington Hills or ISKCON Detroit, I have more books than they have there. And I'm just talking ISKCON books, let alone like other Hindu books and other stuff from other gurus, and even just the word Hindu. But I bought all their books, and I read their books, and I found it fascinating. I follow the philosophy, although I would self-identify as a Hindu. It's hard to know the definition. Like ISKCON is an organization. You get initiated, you can be a friend of ISKCON, you can be part of the congregation. And I went regular. I did prasad service and great people. I've saw almost all the gurus that come here regularly to Detroit. They're on my YouTube channel, Ramapada, Gopal Krishna Goswami, Mother Malati, Indradumana Swami when he came. Any of the big gurus that came to Detroit, I went to the events. But then when COVID-19 happened, I took it as a sign from God and fell out of congregation, and I haven't been back since. I went to Rathiath. I posted that on my YouTube, but reassessing my identity, and at some point I chanted even 16 rounds a day for almost a year. I'd considered taking an initiation, but then I found that it was unlikely I would do it. I still chant regularly. I still read the literature, but honestly, when I moved my desk, I hadn't read most of these books for over 2 years. There was a period of time I spent probably like an hour a day reading Hindu literature, and I almost never read Hindu literature anymore, like a little bit. And when I moved the stuff out, there was so much dust. I had to like multiple rags, the dust, because it's been like 2 years since I had done any of the literature, and then God forbid, I found out I got into Henry Crosby, and some of the conspiracy, and then even a lot of the senior Prabhupada disciples, the sectarian political differences, Antariksha Das and Daneshwara Das, who are white-bodied Detroiters, the actual Prabhupada disciples, versus Kevin McDonald, and I mentioned Cultural Critique Changed My Life, and group strategy. You have to look at Hinduism or even ISKCON as a group strategy. It's an Indian group strategy, and as a convert or a non-Indian person, what does it mean to adapt a religion that's not the religion of your ancestors, or a group strategy that's possibly foreign to your own, or that benefits a group that's not your own, even though the teachings are universal, but there's certain elements of the group strategy. And then obviously if you go to an ISKCON temple, almost everyone's Indian. I discussed that with Jai Devi, and I'm planning on doing another presentation on the self, in terms of science of self, or theory of self as presented in the Bhagavad Gita. But I want to do it thoroughly and have the verses researched, so it might even take me another month. But you're just saying, so if anyone from ISKCON seen this, watches this, because they haven't seen me at the temple for a few years. I got hesitant about taking the vaccination, and then like a midlife identity crisis, and what of the congregation. So I haven't been going to synagogue either. I haven't been to synagogue since COVID-19 started. A handful of times I haven't been to ISKCON temple. But I'm doing these books that changed my life. A lot of the people that I speak with, Church of Entropy, Jai Devi, Arjun, Theology Unleashed, have Hindu leanings. And even when I was on Ben Thorpe the other day, Grace Thorpe, discussing things in more as a representative of Judaism, a Jew, I speak about things in a logical, non-denominational way, and of pure karma, action, reaction. And although I didn't quote Hinduism or ISKCON literature, most of the people just probably looked at me like as a Jew, or even like a rabbi. But a lot of the thoughts actually came from the Hindu conception of karma. And so with that introduction, let's get straight to it and look at some books. So I have here, I'm using two computers, so I hope this works. And I'm going to give just a quick visual tour of the books, and then I'm going to go more in depth and show a picture of my mom here. Actually, these I've meant to send them. I have tapes, and God forbid anyone from Detroit remembers Bob Roberts. So Bob Roberts was at the temple for years. I don't think he ever got initiated, but came to Detroit. I have his funeral speeches in Detroit ISKCON. He had given me tapes from Sadaputa Das, and I had meant to send them. I know someone put on YouTube, but these are Sadaputa. Richard Thompson, the famous physicist. So these are tapes of his on various Vedic science topics. And so if someone watches this in Detroit and wants these, I'm happy to give them to someone who wants to do something with those. I think I have the record, the old Prabhupada LP record. I was trying to learn Sanskrit here, the alphabet, but I have the old Prabhupada meditation record. But if someone watches this and has some use and wants to take those Sadaputa tapes to be transcribed, and there's some use to, I'm happy to give them to somebody. So let me start here at the bottom. And so here's the Srimad Bhagavatam. I'll come back to this later. I'll try to do it chronological, which is, just show what's on my shelf. So I put these on the bottom because they're the heaviest. Not that they're the least important, God forbid, they could be the most important, but just for the stability of my bookshelf, I put the heavier ones on the bottom. So here's Srimad Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is well known to be the most important of the literature, and I'll give a little explanation of it. And just to show, I got this autographed by Gopal Krishna Goswami, who kind of guilted me into buying it. And I also have the 5th canto autographed by Gopal Krishna Goswami. And I was at an event at Farmington ISKCON, and he encouraged, he asked people to raise their hands who didn't have. I wonder if I could get better resolution. I should be able to get better resolutions, maybe because my hand's not steady. So this is not working well. So I'm just trying to give a small view. But so he had, is there anyone here who doesn't have Bhagavatam, and only okay, I'm an honest man and I didn't have it, so only 2 or 3 people raised their hands, and he insisted anybody who doesn't have Bhagavatam should buy it now. So and it was $300. It was not even cheap. It was quite a bit, but I ended up buying it, and thank God I for 6 months I read a chapter a day from Bhagavatam, and then the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and I read through the whole thing. Some of it more careful than not, and maybe in the future I'll read through again. So just start up here. So here is Sadaputa, Prabhupada Lilamrita, and I don't have the full set. I've read the full set, but I read some of them online because Detroit ISKCON didn't have the full set. So I got all these online. At Detroit ISKCON that didn't have them all. So some of them I read online. And this is the famous ISKCON endorsed biography of Prabhupada and the history of the movement from Prabhupada's biography before coming to America, the first years in America, through his death in I think 1976. And I have next to that some other Sadaputa books. So through here are all various books of famous. Anyone familiar with ISKCON would know. Satsvarupa Das, not Sadaputa, Satsvarupa Godasa, who I think he was. He's one of the original disciples, and may have been original GBC, and he's written a whole bunch of books. So you can see here I have a few other books on Vaishnava behavior and the 26 qualities of a devotee, truthfulness, compassion, on Vrindavan, reading reform, japa transformation, all good books. Then I have Stephen Knapp, and unless he's written some newer books, I have almost all of his books. So just 24 books. So Stephen Knapp, Srinandana is the chairman of the board, president of Detroit ISKCON. and he probably has like 30 some books, but I have almost all his books. If he's came out with a few in the last few years, I don't have them, or some of them might not be in print. Some of them are better than others. Like this one here, Proof of Vedic Culture's Global Existence, I found exceptional. He's got one on Detroit, the history of the Detroit Temple or miracles. This is probably his most popular one, Crimes Against India and the Need to Protect Vedic Tradition. And Stephen Knapp also will call himself a generic Hindu, and he was taking that approach. And so this is probably his most popular book, The Crimes Against India. But Krishna deities and their miracles, spreading Vedic tradition through temples. Some of these are about preaching, and some of them are generic to Krishna consciousness and ISKCON or Hinduism in general. Of not just things related to the power of Dharma, Vedic culture, the soul, the heart of Hinduism, prayers, mantras, Gayatris, Vedic prophecies, secret teachings of the Vedas. So a lot of introductory stuff that was very helpful to me when I first started studying. Sometimes going straight into the scripture is very difficult, and even more books on the history of Hinduism. So here on the top shelf also, because these I have arranged, I have a lot by the same author. So here, Bhakti Vikasa Swami, God forbid people know him. He is actually, I'm not sure. I haven't met this man. So I have a few books of Bhakti Vikasa Swami, and these are generic books about brahmacharya, traditional India life, on Prabhupada. So interesting books. Another one on Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. I thought that he was the one I had autographed. So here actually I have Stephen Rosen, a prolific author, one of the more popular authors, and is kind of a Jewish man from Brooklyn, who I actually also met when I had went to the Brooklyn Temple, and I was a Hasidic Jew, so people are like, oh, meet Stephen Rosen. He's also a Jew, and so he's a big author, and all types of basic content, kind of like ISKCON historian, generic. So I actually have two of these books. This is one of the first books I got. One of these copies, The Four Principles of Freedom, is a book I got in New York. And Black Lotus, the biography of Bhakti Tirtha Swami, stuff on vegetarianism, interfaith, reincarnation. Anyone would have been ISKCON, you're well known. I'm not sure. I'll talk later about recommending or see who's in the chat if anyone's saying something about what books I'd recommend. So this is who I was thinking of, Bhakti Raghava Swami, and I actually have all his books autographed. So this is the man, God forbid, who lost a leg in, I believe, a Muslim attack on a Hindu temple that was bombed, and he lost a leg. And he's got books on Varna Ashrama, specifically returning to farm life, in a series of books. And one of the pujaris at the ISKCON Farmington Hills, Bhakta Prabhu, also chanted with him, friendly with him for years, is a disciple of his. And so he specializes in farm life and has a few disciples here in Metro Detroit, and very good books on Varnashrama, farm life, and creating farming communities, which eventually they accomplished here, at least somewhat, with the Deva Madhava Das and some of the people in Ypsilanti that ended up purchasing a farm and now have cows. So as part of that, through the inspiration of Bhakti Raghava Das. And see, when he came here, I bought all of his books, and maybe I don't. I got most of them autographed, so they may not all be autographed. And I'll show also just got to have these autographed. Michael Cremo. So Michael Cremo had came here to Ann Arbor and spoke at University of Michigan, Wayne State, and Michigan State University, and I drove him. I picked him up in Wayne State and took him to University of Michigan, then Michigan State, where he with Antariksha Das, and he spoke at University of Michigan, and actually one of the professors came, and it was a great event. That was years ago. He's also been interviewed on Theology Unleashed. We have his books autographed, and I guess I just have two of his books on human devolution and the forbidden archaeology. So here is Richard Thompson. I might come back to these books, see who's watching, but I have the whole Satiputta collection, Richard Thompson on the sacred universe, Maya, the world is virtual reality. And these books are out of print and expensive. So actually some of these books, if you want to buy online, could be like $40, $50. So like you can't even get these books if you want it. So like God and Science, Vedic Cosmography. So this one I actually got at Detroit ISKCON. And maybe Bob Roberts personally gave this to me because you can't even buy these anymore. They're out of print. They only printed of like 1,000 copies when they first came out. And they never reprinted them again. So if you buy them online, they're expensive. And I think Bob Roberts personally gave me that one here on Vedic Cosmography, and this other one, Mechanistic and Non-Mechanistic Science. So when I used to do Harinam in University of Michigan, when Siddha Hari Das and Natabara Garanga Das, I used to put these books out. And I remember showing these books to Siddha Hari Das now, who is an author. And I have his book here. I'll get to his book, Siddha Hari, who's recently written a book on the topic, but say I was part of the influence who was probably the first person who showed him these books by Richard Thompson at University of Michigan. And we used to talk, for hours and hours about these topics of Vedic science. So, Richard Thompson, anyone who knows anything about ISKCON is, I think he was a Cornell or Princeton PhD physicist, and he was the one Prabhupada assigned to studying Vedic cosmology, cosmography, and we'll say he is the fountainhead of the current temple of the Vedic planetarium. So, the temple at Sri Mayapur, temple of the Vedic planetarium. And actually, Michael Cremo is on the board of directors, and obviously Alfred Four Ambrish Das is the donor. I think has given over $100 million to the fund, but the father of the actual studies of it is Richard Thompson, Satiputta, and ISKCON ever. And I said I have these tapes from. If someone wants them, I'm happy to give them to them. That they record them and put them on YouTube. I don't even own a cassette player anymore. But as far as I know, I bought all of the books of Richard Thompson that were for sale. I mean, there's probably other literature. So here is I put Siddharth's book together with Richard Thompson. So Siddha Hari Das. If someone shows him this video, I was supposed to interview him on my channel about his book. But he was on Modern Day Debate and Theology Unleashed with Arjun, and I think he's actually staying in Michigan on the farm. And he's a PhD, was in the PhD program, Computer Science, University of Michigan, and he wrote a book, The Big Bang and the Sages, and I actually put that together with my Richard Thompson books, and I'm pretty sure that I was the first person to show him this stuff in University of Michigan, and I said these books are actually out of print. So Ashish Delela, I interviewed on my channel. He was just on T-Jump and Theology Unleashed, and I found his literature because I just wanted to learn as much as possible about Vedic cosmology. And so I was ordering these books. I had no idea who the man was. I didn't know whether he was initiated devotee or not. I saw he dedicated his book to Prabhupada. I brought his books to Detroit ISKCON and ISKCON Farmington Hills, and no one had heard of him. And then eventually I found he was on YouTube, and I reached out to them. He was talking to T Jump about logic. Here's his book, Gödel's Mistake. And, so I might do, more streaming on, we'll see how much viewership do, okay, just make sure the sound is good. So, a pill eater, long time no see. God bless. So let me go. Okay, so here, just while we're looking at it, is the Bhakti Tirtha Swami. So I have a lot of Bhakti Tirtha Swami books, not the full collection. And a lot of these are collected from his speaks. So in Detroit, Bhakti Tirtha Swami has a lot of disciples. Not just African American, but Jambavan, I believe, is a Bhakti Tirtha disciple. And he had came to Detroit. He was involved in Detroit, and was one of really the pillars. And I wouldn't mind talking about the glories of what's actually in these books, but I'm just kind of show the book. So Bhakti Tirtha's. If you're an ISKCON disciple, you definitely know who Bhakti Tirtha Swami is. If you're not an ISKCON disciple, you probably never heard of any of these people. So Bhakti Tirtha Swami, African American convert who went to an Ivy League school and traveled the world, set up temples in Eastern Europe and Africa, and had a radio show and made a whole bunch of disciples, was very close with Kirtananda Swami. And in fact, I'll get to Henry Doktorsky. Henry Doktorsky's initiation ceremony was the same initiation ceremony where Bhakti Tirtha Swami took sannyas under Kirtananda Swami. But Radhanath Swami, and so interesting history, but based on his lectures, in which he gave a bunch of, they put into book series, Surrender, Reflections of Sacred Teachings, Spiritual Warrior. So, those are good books. Gopal Krishna Goswami. So Gopal Krishna Goswami comes to Detroit. I have on my YouTube channel said he's the one who got me to buy the Srimad Bhagavatam. He has the most disciples in Detroit. Recently he's been here. He's done initiations. Gopal Krishna Goswami are the most dominant disciples here in Detroit. And I never saw any of his books in Detroit. And I don't think Gopal Krishna Goswami actually wrote books. So these are most likely collected from his speeches written by his disciples. Collected from his disciples and published in books. And I had to order these from India. So it could be that has changed. But, when I wanted to know more about Gopal Krishna Goswami and his method and understandings. And even though he had all these disciples in Detroit, no one had any books by him. So I had to order from India, and cost a whole bunch shipping and handling, and took forever to get the books. So there's on various topics of collected qualities of a devotee. Hopefully I'll talk more about this because there's so many to get through, and I could talk for a whole hour just about any one of these books, but I want to get through, and God forbid, Duvid in my ego, I want to show off some of my autographs. So Bhakti Parasupnama Swami, who is a disciple of Jayapataka Swami, and does tours of of various places in India, a well-regarded tour guide, comes to Detroit regularly. Been at the house of Nitya Krishna Das, and I bought all of his books when he came, usually directly from him. So I bought his books, and I bought them directly from him, and I got them autographed. So here you see B.P. Swami, Bhakti Paraswitma Swami. This one's 2012. This is one of the first books I got. I believe I got this at Nitya Krishna Das, and Natabara Granga and Siddha Hari were probably there. I think all of the University of Michigan, Bhakti Yoga Society was there. And then over the years, he wrote more books, and I have bought all of his books, and he might have more since the last few years. And I have all of his books, and I have autographed. And he's got picture books, tour books, Navadweep, and Radharani. Some of them have more stories and pictures, and some of them are more philosophical. But like a great man, and great books. Here, this man, he was doing the interviews on the GBC channel for ISKCON. Just these two books. He came to Detroit, and this book, he doesn't have his name, The Italian Devotee, and this was his wife, How to Mess Up Your Life with Astrology. He didn't even put his book on this one. Did Prabhupada Want Woman Diksha Gurus? He came to Detroit, and I bought his wife's book. I think Did Prabhupada Want Woman Diksha Gurus I bought online. Here's a great one. I used to, Ann Arbor. In fact, like now popular devotees like Deva Madhava Das, not the Garanga Das. We learned some of the songs out of this book. I had this book like Namaste Narashima Dev, the Lord Narashima Dev prayers. They're kind of complicated, and no one knew the song, so we learned how to sing that out of this book. That I'm not sure if I got in Detroit. I maybe even got this one in New York. But they said practices and some of the prayers and songs. This is a really good book. So Arjun Bhattacharya. So I reread this one recently, and so this is by Dinabandhu Das, who Arjun Bhattacharya, who was working in Detroit for a short period, now is in India. He's a well-known photographer and disciple of Dinabandhu Das, who mostly is known for telling stories. But this is a great book about the process of Bhakti Yoga and how Harinam Sankirtan transforms in a person's heart and makes them into a better person. And you can see he actually has a message to me. David, God forbid I can't read his handwriting, but Dinabandhu Das. And so most of his books are stories, and is a famous storyteller. But this book is a translation of a book by Thakura, one of Prabhupada's guru's guru, an older book in ISKCON history about the Vaishnava process. Yeah, I chant Hare Krishna even regularly, although I've fallen out of temple practice. So Dinabandhu, I might have other books from him. Here's some other books just on generic topics that I guess I didn't have enough to order by author. All these books I think I got on Detroit ISKCON. If you want to know, like on Jagannath Puri. Here's your biography of Haridasa Thakura on Ekadasi. The Nectar of the Holy. So here's Sachinanda, the German devotee. I don't think he's ever been here to Detroit. This is a pretty good book on the scientific analysis of chanting the rising sun of the holy name. I used to put this book out when we did Harinam. I don't think they ever came out with a part two. Navadweep, the life of Ramanujacharya, from hundreds of years ago. Here on Lord Jagannath, the four acharyas. This is a translation of Prabhupada's guru, or maybe he wrote it in English. It's probably a translation of the life and teachings of the four acharyas. So this is a pretty important book. People wanting to understand more of the historical basis of ISKCON within larger Hinduism. Sri Chaitanya Mangala, the seventh Goswami, biography of Srila Sachinanda Thakura, more in the longer line. This is an interesting book. This is an academic book about the madness of saints, which talks about bipolar disorders. God forbid people find like Kanye West and saying he's bipolar. So this is an academic book claiming that Lord Chaitanya probably suffered bipolar disorder and talking about the madness of saints. Duvid, Church of Entry gets very upset if you call her mad. Duvid will self-identify as a madman. And Lord Chaitanya is also sometimes referred to as a madman. And so this was an academic book on the madness of saints. So I'll sit down. So let me go to the bottom shelf here. So these are not ISKCON books. Here on my bottom shelf, I have a Gandhi history book. I have Gandhi's autobiography. This is a cute book. I used to put this out on Harinam Sankirtan. This was written by an ISKCON disciple. And I enjoyed being anti-evolution. So I did Harinam Sankirtan and put out books. I would argue with people against evolution, which is popular among a lot of ISKCON devotees. But I said, like, eventually they got initiated and took a different approach, as where like Duvid would be sitting there just generically arguing against evolution, well, as opposed to promoting ISKCON. But this is a very good book written by an ISKCON devotee about nature's IQ. Here is a very good book about the history of yoga in America, the yoga tradition, its history, literature, philosophy, and practice. So showing here, you has the origins of yoga, the different schools of yoga, a history of it in India, and then coming to America. Sorry about that. So a lot of these books I haven't looked at for years. Here is an academic book. This was a pretty good book on the language of gods in the world of men, Sanskrit culture and power in pre-modern India, just talking about the role of Sanskrit and kind of having like an elite class of people that understood Sanskrit in today in the creation of modern India. This was actually a very good historical book, The Nay Science and History of German Indology. The first people in the West to look into and translate into Western languages were German. The first translation of Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas were German, and so this is an interesting history of just some of the early interaction between India and the West going back hundreds of years, and the early translations and philosophical interlay. There's definitely more. I've looked more into that. Some literature. Talk more about that maybe at a different time with I think it's Cosmo de Gama and the Jews of Kerala and the Spain. Some of the first interactions. The coming to some interesting history. Here are very interesting books. I got them at the Brooklyn ISKCON. It's on Vastu Satra about how to build buildings according to Vedic law, and there's 3 volumes. And so these are interesting. I'm not sure if he's an ISKCON disciple or not, although I bought it in the ISKCON temple. Here, Trump, Abhikar Trump Sakra, the story of the Republican Hindu coalition and Kumar. And it's interesting, he writes about going to New Vrindavan, and he's actually a follower of the Arya Samaj, and he talks about the Satya Prakath in this book and in his but he's a friend of ISKCON. And it was interesting, back in 2016. So this was actually a pretty interesting book. I'll show I have the Swami Vivekananda literature, so I have quite a bit of his readings. And because my grandfather's grandfather was a rabbi who was at the and a participant in the 1893 Parliament of World Religions, where Vivekananda spoke at Temple Bethel, where I had my bar mitzvah in Detroit. And to interfaith, Vivekananda is more well known when you probably have anybody in America of any Indian guru, although the movement of the Ramakrishna mission is much smaller. So this was extremely well researched of everywhere that Vivekananda went and spoke to, and where he stayed, and what he accomplished. And even had interesting things like Vivekananda's meeting with Tesla, where he talked about the conservation of mass and energy, not like Einstein, where they actually had a formula like E equals mc squared, but they talked in the 1890s with Tesla about mass and energy. So a whole bunch of interesting stories. And so when Narendra Modi spoke in Congress, he mentioned Vivekananda. And here's another history of India. Just generic. I have more books on the history of India. India has a long history. It's a big geography, and so if you're studying Hinduism, there's a lot to know about it. This is very interesting stuff. Prabhupada went to school with Subhachandra Bose, and Prabhupada calls Subhachandra Bose his friend. The only person you'll ever find Prabhupada referred to as his friend is Subhachandra Bose, who they went to school together at Scottish Church College. So I did a lot of independent research. A lot of people in ISKCON don't know this stuff, weren't particularly interested in it, but in terms of Hindu nationalism and maybe a different take. So Subhachandra Bose obviously founded the Indian independent Indian Army, and had went to Nazi Germany and brokered a deal with the Nazis to recognize a free and independent India. And so this is an interesting history. I've read his autobiography, and I've talked about that at a different time. But also some research on, I also like Bhakti Ban Maharaj, some of Prabhupada's early disciples, other than Prabhupada, who went to Germany. Here, this is actually a pretty good book. Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramahamsa Yogananda. So interesting, Vivekananda and Paramahamsa Yogananda both went to Scottish Church College. So when Prabhupada came to America, he certainly knew about Paramahamsa Yogananda and Vivekananda, because he also went to Scottish Church College. And actually, Prabhupada criticizes Vivekananda. If you read his literature, he's constantly criticizing him. But in terms of his arguments and against atheism, Prabhupada actually uses and almost certainly took many of his arguments and quotes directly from Vivekananda. And I once even thought about doing a study of that, showing like the parable of the frog in the well. I believe came from Vivekananda. It's not actually a Vedic source. Here's also a few interesting. This is Paramahamsa Yogananda's guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and his outlook. So this was Paramahamsa Yogananda's guru, and just a little information about him. And here was an interesting book on Sri Sai Satrita Sai Baba. And so anyone Hinduism knows Sai Baba. There's the Sai Baba with the afro and the music, and the magician who's making gold appear with the bolo bolo satna bolo om namah shivaya, great tunes. But there's the saintly Sai Baba, who is like half Muslim and a renunciate, and has a murti, a form of him in many Hindu temples. So it's an interesting book. This book was actually valuable. I got this from Atmaram Das in Ann Arbor, who actually bought it off him. So I was showing Jennifer, here's some Vivekananda books on Raja Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. So I've read quite a bit of the Vivekananda literature, and in ISKCON they don't promote Vivekananda, but if you want to be well versed in Hinduism, you have to know about Vivekananda. So here was Stephen Knapp's book. It was too big to fit with the rest of his book on the power of Sri Sri Radha Kunja Bahari, stories of miracles of the deities in the Detroit Temple. So these books were extremely interesting, and most people in ISKCON never heard of them. Like I mentioned it to a few people. Some of the senior, even Mother Malati, I showed some of these books to, and so W.S. Father Urquhart was Prabhupada's professor at Scottish Church College, and Prabhupada says good things about him. In Detroit, when the local Catholic priests requested to speak to Prabhupada, Prabhupada said he went to a Christian school, and he mentions Father Urquhart and studying under him, and said he was a good teacher. And when Prabhupada was in Scottish Church College, Father Urquhart was a professor, and he went on to become chancellor and dean of Scottish Church College, and generally is very respected among Hindus. Even though he was a Christian, he was a father, and he wrote a lot of books on Hinduism. In fact, probably he had Father Urquhart has a more positive view of personalism in Ramanujacharya than Shankaracharya. Even when Prabhupada was more, of Gandhi and possibly, Shankaracharya, his Christian professor, Father Urquhart, was more in favor of Ramanujacharya. And he writes quite a few interesting books. Here's the Upanishad and Life. I bought all of his books that I could find. The Religious Quest of India, The Vedanta and Modern Thought, Humanism and Christianity. So I bought his books on Christianity because I was just curious, all the books I could find, Theosophy and Christian Thought. And this one is probably the most famous Father Urquhart book, Pantheism and the Value of Human Life, where he talks about the pessimism of Hinduism, where he claims that Hinduism has a fundamentally pessimistic outlook on human life. So those are all of my non-ISKCON Hindu books. So I have some more on sociology and coming to America, and ethnographical studies about when Indians first came to America. I also have the history of translations in America, and I have that on the other side, so I'm not going to show those today, but all the rest of the books will be ISKCON books. So you can see, from my shelves here, I have one shelf of non-ISKCON books. But I have other books on the history of India and some politics and various other things. They're good books also. So here, I got this from oh God forbid, his name slipping me, on the famous NYU. Now he's in Atlanta. Was by but he contacted me on Facebook. Now they sell these here in Farmington Hills. When I got these, they didn't have them, and I ordered them online from New York. Now the devotees in Atlanta, the Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Vibhava of Prabhupada's Guru, which he wrote a whole bunch of books, like hundreds of books, but it has his biography, an overview of some of his essays and thought, a list of his of writings, and I also got from him Sri Chaitanya Bhagavata, which isn't as Prabhupada made it effort Chaitanya Kirtamrita, and I think Chaitanya Bhagavata was written by some of his other disciples, and also interesting things. So here's probably for people in ISKCON, like Hari, do Harinam Sankirtan, the nectar of devotion. So I'd even told Siddhari, if you should memorize this book. If you're really into ISKCON, you should memorize this book. This is Prabhupada's I'm not sure if it's a translation of an earlier book or Prabhupada wrote it himself, but it's it's an overview of the philosophical theological principles of Krishna consciousness. This they gave me in Detroit ISKCON, an early edition of one of the first Hebrew translations. So you see this is in Hebrew. This is one of the first Hebrew translations of Bhagavad Gita, an earlier edition. They, now, ISKCON is very big in Israel, Harinam Sankirtan in Israel. So here's Bhagavad Gita, one of the first translations in Hebrew. Here the Krishna book, also like George Harrison funded this book, was one of Prabhupada's main books. Like if you do, devotees who do Harinam Sankirtan and book distribution, this is one of the first books, they give people, and ISKCON devotees, a lot of them, will read this book every day or read to their kids parts, and it's the collective stories of Krishna from Bhagavatam. More biographies, a book on deity worship. So here are the Prabhupada books. So a lot of these books here are the books that were officially authored by Prabhupada in his lifetime. A Second Chance, Beyond Illusion and Doubt, The Path of Perfection, Queen Kuti, The Nectar of Instruction. There's also, Commit to Memory, Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers, Path of Yoga, Lord Chaitanya, The Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, Beyond Birth and Death, Easy Journey to Other Planets, some other pamphlets. So people who do Harinam Sankirtan, these are like the common books that were distributed by Prabhupada in his lifetime. This one's very good. This Sri Namarita, The Nectar of the Holy Name. And I don't think it's a collection of like everything Prabhupada wrote about Harinam Sankirtan in sections. So this one was very good also. Here is Chanting Hare Krishna, Life Comes from Life, which is somewhat like arguments against evolution from Prabhupada. One of the first things that attracted me to Prabhupada was his willingness to argue against evolution. I'm going to get to the Hindu modernity books. I'm just looking at the chat a little bit. That's academic books. So that's a book by an academic. It's not an ISKCON book. It's about ISKCON, but it's an academic book. Speaking about Varna Ashrama, so this is collected lectures and writings of Prabhupada about farm life in Varna Ashrama. So this section of my book, are Prabhupada books that have been directly authored by Prabhupada. So here, the Mahabharata condensation. So here, the Sri Birad Bhagavatamrita. It's slipping my mind even what this is. If it's so this is Srila Satana Goswami translation. I think he was one of the early disciples of disciple going back closer to Lord Chaitanya. These are very interesting books. I showed these to Ashish Delay, the one who's on the channel, and these are different texts. The Surli Siddhanta about Vedic cosmology through Danavir Goswami, who was in the Israeli army, was GBC in Israel, and now he's in Kansas. But he was one of the big experts on Vedic cosmology. Here's commentaries on the 5th canto of Bhagavad Gita, another one, Bula Gola Tattva, The Science of the Round Earth. Interesting books. Ramayana. This Urmila Devidasi came here to Detroit. I'm not sure if I was able to get this autographed. No, so I didn't get Urmila Devi Dasi. I think I ordered online, but she came here to Detroit, and she done a translation, Instructions of the Mind, commentaries, good book. She was stationed in Detroit, and obviously Manischewitz, the famous Jewish Manischewitz family, or previously famous Jewish family. Your average modern Jew might not even know Manischewitz anymore. The wine still exists, but Urmila Devi Dasi book, The Art of Chanting, another really good book on the art of chanting, japa meditation techniques. Here, Indra Dumini. So I even used to put this book out when we did Harinam in Ann Arbor, and Nata Garanga Das, who went on to join the New York Harinam, and Ramaroya, the colleague of Indra Dumina Swami, of Indra Das. And so here's his book, The Heart and Transcendental, book distribution. I know what some of these books are. Vaishnava Etiquette. This is a good book. Here's Vaishnava Etiquette. You mentioned that often. There's also Vedic Paradigm. Past more like the kids book. Here's one of the Vyasa Puja books. Jagadguru, the Detroit ISKCON, gave me this one, something very expensive. This was actually also an Teach Yourself Slokas, interesting book on like memorizing sloka, art treasures of the Mahabharata. Some nice pictures. I used to put this book out when I used to do Harinam Sankirtan. So the ISKCON devotees more focus on these Prabhupada books and book distribution, or even selling them. I like putting out more books that would spark up conversations or pictures, or would people find more interesting. So this shelf, I showed the Bhakti Tirtha Swami books. This was a very interesting book. I read this one recently. It was expensive. It's an academic book, Hindu Encounter with Modernity, about Kirnanath Datta Bhaktivinoda, who I'm not sure if he's directly in the line of ISKCON, or was like a brother or relative of one of the early gurus of ISKCON. And I think he went to university and looked at framing Hinduism in the modern intellectual context. So this is, you're looking at Gaudiya Vaishnavism, the line of ISKCON, going back into the 1890s, in the question of framing Hinduism in modernity and the historical method. So it's actually a very good book. I think it's like Oxford Press, or I'm not sure. I bought this one online. But this was a very interesting book, just called The Hindu Encounter with Modernity, and the reassessment, kind of like in Judaism, the Haskalah Reform movement approach to can you mend Enlightenment movement and history and science together with Hinduism. And I'm not sure the exact relation with the ISKCON lineage of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, might be somewhere in the Gaudiya Vaishnava lineage. So I went over these books. So two shelves left. I know Carson said he might show up. So Seraphim Goose, how's it going? So I'm showing books just on Hinduism, Krishna consciousness. So if you're like the dynastic lineage of Hinduism, a lot of these books do cover it. So here, these books were really interesting. The Rama Damodara Vilasa, about Vishnunujana, who was part of Jefferson Starship, I think before Jefferson Airplane, and became a member of the Hare Krishnas and traveled around, was an excellent musician, died mysteriously, and recruited thousands and thousands, initiated. He was one of Prabhupada's main disciples, devotees. He died in 1976. A lot of people never heard of him, but he was, even like Indra Das, like 24-hour kirtan. Vishnunujana was the most famous Harinam leader. Prabhupada chose him to chant. He was a professional musician. I think he was involved with Jefferson Starship, and traveled with Tamil Krishna Goswami. I have here his books, the bus tours across America, and so this was recent books that collected together the memory of Vishnunujana, and it's named after the deities that were on the bus. And there's some conspiracy theory, or even him and Tamil Krishna Goswami were partners. A lot of people take a more positive view towards Vishnunujana, or negative toward Krishna Goswami, or the opposite. But they're very interesting books. Here's the Mother Malati's husband, Shyamasundara Das, Chasing Rhinos. I think he came out with volume 3. I might order volume 3 soon. And he talks about George Harrison and the Beatles, and interesting things. He had went to England, and recent books. This book is also very interesting. Academic book from Oxford, Modern Hindu Personalism: The History, Life, and Thought of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Prabhupada's guru. Talks a little bit about the relation of sending people to Nazi Germany, Bhakti Ban Maharaj, and like the Hindu encounter with modernity. Bhakti Ban Maharaj, Prabhupada's godbrother, who is the one who had met with the Nazi leaders, had some success, and had laid the groundwork for Prabhupada to come to the West. The first of his godbrothers that had some success and made a few devotees said that the Westerners have questions that we don't have answers for. So, his understanding, there were certain questions that Westerners posed that they didn't have answers for. And also, when he spoke to had very good relations actually with the Nazis, who had interest in it, although Prabhupada's guru advised him not to go back to Nazi Germany, and they had a caste understanding of Bhagavad Gita, that the Gaudiya Math had a non-caste understanding, as where the Nazis liked the Bhagavad Gita, wanted to learn more, but they were insistent on a caste understanding. So interesting stuff from an academic level. I was never able to buy the Bhakti Ban Maharaj books, and so there's more history. I haven't studied this, but the World War II stuff interests me quite a bit when I was reading this. So here, Giriraj, the famous son of the judge, whose dad offered $1 million to get his kid out of ISKCON, and he's in Texas. I've never seen him. He came to Detroit, but some of his books, different books of early disciples of Prabhupada. Here's Yamuna Devi Das, her recent book, A Life of Unalloyed Devotion. So Mukunda Goswami, this book I remember not to borrow Gauranga Das when I put out books on Harinam Sankirtan, and he had borrowed this book, and it was interesting. Another Jewish man. I think he was recently interviewed on the Late Morning Show with Namarasa Das, and he was one of the first people to be sent to London, and stories about the Beatles and George Harrison. And he's also the one who created the legal entity of ISKCON. It was one of the first books I used to put out when I did Harinam Sankirtan. Here's an intellectual that has some Edwin Bryant, The Hare Krishna Movement, A Post-Charismatic Fate of a Religious Transplant. It's a more academic book. So histories of the Hare Krishna movement in India from some of the early disciples, Sri Prabhupada and his German devotees, and Tamil Krishna Goswami's books of his biography, his account of the last days of Prabhupada's life. Interesting that the history in Germany, because Prabhupada was successful in Germany, so that history. Here's more, Sahari Sari Dasa, this book, Nori Muster, who left the movement, Betrayal of Spirit. God forbid I have, also, Monkey on a Stick, about the killing for Krishna. So Betrayal of Spirit was a person who left the movement and had critical things to say about it. A God Who Dances, also interesting book. Nectar of so this one, I almost thought of doing a whole stream on this one. So the Nectar of Discrimination is about the gunas, the three modes of passion, ignorance, and goodness, and a very good book, excellent book. I reread it recently, with actually in the last few months, together with Dina Bandus. So I almost had thought about doing a stream on these two books because they're very theological and systematic of devotion. Sri Thakura's book on the nectar of a systematic understanding of how Harinam Sankirtan transcends the heart, and this book on the three modes of material nature. So, this highly recommend this book if anyone could get a hold of it. It might be hard to come across. I'm not sure how many copies there are of it that exist. So last books. So here, Daneshvar Das, Divine or Demonic Spiritual Economics, very good book. Another book, Daneshvar Das, Changing the Karma. I interviewed him on my channel. He's in, I think, originally from Detroit. Maybe he's in Serbia or Eastern Europe. I'm not sure. He was having some health issues, but you see my channel. I interviewed him. Henry Daktorsky, The Killing for Krishna, 11 Naked Emperors, Killing for Krishna, God forbid former devotee, God forbid Salochana, the Hare Krishna devotee who was killed in the Newton Vrindavan, is actually from my area. You came across that. I have 100 Monkeys, Thomas Drescher, the Prabhupada disciple who was a serial killer. God forbid he killed a bunch of people. But he was a Prabhupada disciple, and he wrote a biography. Henry Daktorsky's collection, History of New Vrindavan. I spoke to him twice. I'll probably speak to him again. I have volume 6 that I haven't read yet, maybe as volume 7. And, it's a very interesting history of New Vrindavan. These were interesting books here. I used to put this book out also, Michael Cremo, Divine Nature, Spiritual Perspective on the Environmental Crisis. Another girl who went to Roper, who was in University of Michigan. And I told, she was interested in, the environmentalism. And I said, you could do more to save the environment from preaching Krishna consciousness. And I think I had shown her that book, but interesting book. So here were two books, Trainwrecks and Transcendence and Krishna Punk. So a book written by a kid in Japan who was part of like the Krishna hardcore punk rock scene. And then his dad wrote a book. And I think he was also on The Late Show of Namarasa. I watched that by Victor Leo Dicaria. And so it was interesting, like he wrote a book about becoming a Hare Krishna devotee, and his dad wrote a book about the same experience. So that was kind of interesting. Brain Game, also Dhanasvir Goswami, interesting book. Dhanasvir Goswami is said from Kansas, who was in Israel. Here I actually showed this to. I used to put this book out on Harinam Sankirtan, Krishna, Israel, and the Druze by Dhira Govinda Dasa, and the famous book of Dhanasvir Goswami, If Attacked, I'll Chant Hare Krishna, of the Hare Krishna devotee in the IDF. So more interesting books. So a few more here. I think this from Dhanasvir was like a journal they had, and they had some stuff about the Middle East. There's one, women, masters or mothers, here, Indra Swami, who came to Detroit. He's got a handful of disciples here. Sachi Sutta, people in Detroit, to Singh's Pujari disciple. So he came to Ann Arbor and they performed their play, and I waited afterwards to speak to him. And he's got a whole bunch of books. They don't sell them in Detroit. I thought maybe to order a whole bunch of his books. It's kind of Eastern Europe, but one of his books. A few more. Here's Back to Godhead. A handful of Back to Godhead. I actually used to put these books out when I used to do Harinam Sankirtan, End of Modern Civilization, Alternative Future, and Oil, the Final Countdown to Global Crisis and its Solution, Sa Devi Dasa, which was kind of about environmentalism, and you're saying that returning to Varnashra Dharma would be a solution to the environmental problems. So those books were interesting. I looked at them for a long time, but I actually used to put those books out. So it's like when I did Harinam Sankirtan University of Michigan, I put out different type books than a lot of people in ISKCON probably never even seen these books. Like Harinam Sankirtan mostly does these like Prabhupada books, but there's all types of literature. This is interesting, beyond institutional gurus and initiation and party men, about the current system of running ISKCON politics. Oh, and here also, because I had met him when I was in New York. He was one of the pujaris in the Second Avenue Temple, and used to see him in Washington Square Park. And now he's at Columbia University. He's doing very well. Gadahara Pandit Das, I think we're friends on Facebook. And he became a very popular preacher. He's written books and he speaks to executives. And I remember speaking to him when I was in New York, and he was at the Second Avenue Temple. And he wrote a book, Urban Monk, about kind of his autobiography and thoughts on it. And then now his specialty is speaking to like business executives or general meditation on closing the apps. So Gadahara Pandit Das, good man, came here to Metro Detroit. I'm not sure if I got autographed or not. No, I don't think didn't get that one autographed. Some of these more would have been autographed. So move that. I'm going to put it back. Okay, so there is a complete tour of Duvid's ISKCON library. Took a little bit over an hour. Thanks to Luke Ford for his Logitech camera that I was able to use. So I wasn't looking at the chat. So I wanted to do a weekly program of book recommendations. So I didn't necessarily I recommended a handful of books, but I gave a complete tour of all of my books. Hopefully the sound quality was all right, and the video quality. So about 500 books. Maybe if some of the people from Detroit ISKCON or Farmington Hills maybe haven't even seen some of these books. Some of them aren't even for sale or hard to get. Not to like change my life like a progression. I like the biographies. I like the stories of people that changed their life and then became preachers. And like Radhanath Swami, The Journey Home. But I probably have like 50 books of Prabhupada disciples, like Prabhupada Lilamrita, of that changed their life, heard about Krishna consciousness, and then went around preaching it, setting up temples. And I probably read another 50 or 100 ones online that I don't actually own. So I know Carlos, who had came to ISKCON Farmington Hills, said he might join. I thought I might go for like 2 hours, although for some reason I'm a little more exhausted than I thought I might be from this, and so I think I have a ramble or closing thoughts. So let me take a little drink here. If there was anything in the chat, I wasn't following it because I was showing my books. So do an @Duvid if you had anything directly for me. And maybe I'll do a little thoughts on, so I know a lot of people who they became Hare Krishnas, they became involved. As I said at the beginning, I was one of the founders of the Bhakti Yoga Society. You can see on my channel. I used to do Harinam Sankirtan. Some of the people I even was involved in getting started are now great devotees. At Detroit ISKCON and Farmington Hills ISKCON, I helped out Prasad. I know a lot of people that even became devotees while I was going there, and talk philosophy. Yeah, obviously I'm a Jew. I self-identify as a Hindu. I like the literature. It changed my life. I did the practices, but it's kind of they say Hinduism is non-sectarian, but to some aspect, it's kind of sectarian. So you get initiated, you do it, and you become involved in the society, and it's like membership. And so you could be a friend of the movement, you could do the teachings, but it's kind of like cliquish, and also like the Indian Hindu group strategy. So there's different levels, and because I've read so much of the literature, I've been involved for quite a few years. I went to the temple in Detroit and Farmington Hills for years. Also, from the founding of the Farmington Hills Temple, when Juga Kishore Das first went out there, and I was involved on various levels, and even I spoke to hundreds of people, tens of people that have went on to become Hare Krishna, ISKCON devotees, to people who just went and had prasad, read some books. So there's different levels to someone that wants, like I mentioned, Bhakti Tirtha Swami, who one of the main things he wanted to accomplish was to make being a Hare Krishna a viable lifestyle option in Detroit. And he had a radio show, and I think he was a Freemason, and he went to Princeton and had a lot of political contacts, and wanted to make it viable to be a Hare Krishna in America. And then there's the demographics, where you have a lot of Indians, a lot of people coming from India, a lot of people that have recently came from India. So most of the people locally that have joined ISKCON in the last few years are people that were born in India, a lot of them that have came to America very recently, versus Western converts. And so culturally it becomes divergent, where a lot of times the Western converts hang out with other Western converts, and the people from India might even hang out with people who speak the same language, if it's Hindi, Tamil, or the various ethnic groups of India that have different languages, like the Gujaratis, and so there's the viable lifestyle options. Like I was saying, Luke Ford, most Jews who become Bali Tshuva do it because they look at it as a reasonable, viable lifestyle option. I could, build up a family, and there's the belief, is it true? And so if you're a Jew, like compare somewhat Chabad Lubavitch to ISKCON, and they're quite different, but in some senses like a missionary movement. And you're looking at living ISKCON Krishna consciousness as a viable lifestyle option. And is it different if you're Indian versus a Western convert, of the viability of the lifestyle option, and versus just the philosophy. So I mean, generally, like Torah, the Torah is meant to be done. So you could just learn, study Judaism and Kabbalah because it's interesting, but the Torah is meant to be practiced. So also ISKCON is meant to be practiced. You study it to do it. And so you could take it on a various level, like Duvid, you could do some of the teachings, some of the practices, integrate it into your life, without joining, without making it your identity. So it's part of my identity, but it's not my essential identity. Being a Jew is more fundamental to my identity. but it's part of my identity towards, saying it becomes your fundamental identity, versus, the certain levels, like I said, this is a great book. Here, this book on the gunas, the three modes, um, is interesting on an intellectual level, even, if you didn't want it to become a devotee or a Hindu, just to understand the gunas like you wanted to understand Kabbalah. And um, so, Stephen James asking if there's conflict among different Hindus and ISKCON, or they get along. Relatively they get along. There's sectarianism in India, but I mean generally ISKCON is part of Hindu nationalism, and a fundamental part because ISKCON has been so successful in the West. So because ISKCON is has become like a fundamental pillar of Hindu nationalism, and so it's part of the coalition of Hindu nationalists. So if you're Hindu, usually you're familiar with ISKCON, and if you believe that India should be, a free, independent Hindu state, like I mentioned, Subra Bose Chandra Das, who was Prabhupada's friend, the founder of, somewhat Hindu nationalism and even violent Hindu nationalism. So most Hindus will accept ISKCON and Hare Krishna as part of the prominent Hindu organizations. And when Prabhupada did like life memberships, there was one level of ISKCON that is like Chabad, that it's meant to preach to Westerners and spread the ideas of Krishna consciousness, but then at the same time, ISKCON serves as like a safe home for Hindus when they travel to the West. Like, so if you're just like a non-ISKCON Hindu and you go around the world, you could consider that comparable to like a non-Chabad Jew that goes around the world and uses the services of Chabad Lubavitch. That if you want Jewish connections, you want a synagogue, you want kosher food, even if you're not Chabad, when you travel, you could go to Chabad, you could use their services. So in a large aspect, to Hindus in general, ISKCON is like that. That, any major city in the world, you'll have a ISKCON temple. You could go in and do like a religious service, a puja, get a vegetarian meal, meet some connections, network, and you would serve that greater function. So I'd say like most Hindus consider ISKCON part of the club, but within ISKCON, it's exclusive generally. So ISKCON generally considers itself as exclusive, that no one in ISKCON would really call themselves a Hindu. Some of the people that maybe do politics or business, or greater organizing, but most people in ISKCON don't like the term Hindu and would be more exclusive, where it's not like ISKCON is just one path of Hinduism, but it's like the true path, and the other paths are, say, untrue but less true. And so a lot of other Hindu groups are not so exclusive. ISKCON is more exclusive than most other Hindus. And I mean, so Arbane, to put it like Jehovah's Witness, I mean, just in the sense that they missionize. Most Hindus are like Jews, they don't missionize. So you had like the Ramakrishna mission. I have a book on their history in America on my other shelf, of just the Ramakrishna mission. I have another book on Martin Luther King and his disciples and the connection to Hinduism. But generally, Hindus don't missionize. So the ISKCON and Hare Krishna is basically the only, just like Jews don't missionize. So that I would call a closer comparison to Chabad Lubavitch to ISKCON, because Jehovah's Witness, a lot of Christians missionize. So it's not like very few Hindus missionize, and ISKCON is like from the only Hindus that missionize. So saying that comparison, Jehovah's Witness, there's a lot of going door to door or selling books on street corners. So certainly like chanting, Jehovah's Witness don't chant, but they go door to door and they distribute books on street corners. So some of the comparisons are, and also if you read the literature, like Jehovah's Witness is apocalyptical and thinks like the world is coming to an end. So if you get deeper into the ISKCON literature, it's pretty stark. And people think like maybe the world's coming to an end, and God forbid, like hellfire and like Hinduism could seem like friendly on the outside, like everybody's accepted, everything is true, like Krishna is just another word for God, like you call God Jehovah, um Allah, Jesus, Krishna, just add another deity to the pantheon. But the Bhagavatam, it has a lot of things about the depths of hell and an exclusivist approach. So I'm not an official ISKCON member, and I said, like, I used to distribute books. I wasn't an initiated devotee. Even the people that I helped become devotees that eventually got initiated, they don't even talk to me anymore because they became exclusivist, and like Duvid's not going to be saved because I didn't get initiated and they got initiated. And it's kind of like Mormonism, or a lot of other forms like Jehovah's Witness, where you get your inside and you either join and you get saved, or you didn't join and you're not going to be saved. I'm sorry, you're going to hell. A lot of the bigger preachers are more bigger minded, open minded, and even questions about theology would have more uncertainty about what happens to people after they die, versus like doctrine, like this is doctrine and you must believe or you're going to hell or you're not one of us. So like, I mean, also, like, okay, Duvid was a Hasidic Jew, Chabad Lubavitch, a lot of like Jewish cultic movements, and originally Prabhupada wanted to call ISKCON a cult until the West cult had negative connotations, and then there was like anti-cult and trying to get people out of the cult. But in the the classical historic, like the cult of Krishna, the cult of Lord Chaitanya, classically, like in Hinduism, Gaudiya Vaishnava was the cult of Lord Chaitanya, meaning that it was centered around a man, and but also like the membership levels of kind of like it's us against the world, and like I can't even say like it's not us like Duvid, and it's kind of against the world because I'm not initiated, or you like Chabad Lubavitch or Judaism or any, so to say, extremist religion. The view is this is the exclusive truth, and only the devotees have it, and there might be friends of the movement or people on the periphery of the movement, but it's us. It's in essence, it's us against the world, and everybody on the outside is basically lost and may or may not be saved, is likely not to be saved, and that's really true about all religious movements, even like Catholics. Say like Catholics, or or forms of Islam, that look at us. It is us against the world, and you might be nice to your neighbors or employees. You might not talk about religion at work or mention it on the street. But what is the official doctrine? And the official doctrine is only we're going to be saved, because this is the path to salvation. And so you could speak to ISKCON members who may have different understandings of the exclusivity, just like Jews. You can say straight up, like, "Do is the honest Jew." You're like, "Yeah, I'm sorry. This is what we believe. It's us. We're the chosen people. And it's not you. Like, you got to come on to us if you want to be saved." So ISKCON doesn't have like a Brahmanical sense, like a inherited Brahmanical status. It's anti-caste, but saying that you have to come onto these teachings to be saved, and if you don't, your chances aren't so good, or non-existent. But you could speak to official ISKCON devotees to give you. Then they might saying like kind of like call like a bait and switch, or just say try to show the more positive aspects and saying they're nice. You could come to the temple and chant and take vegetarian food and read the literature and just the personal opinion. Like, in my personal opinion, what do we believe? And say, I'm sorry to inform you, you're going to hell. You're like, I'm sorry. If you ask me honestly what I believe, you're going to hell. But you're like, it doesn't mean I'm not going to be nice to you. I won't give you food. I won't chant with you. I'd help you out if you needed a favor. But honestly, if you want my opinion, you're going to hell. So yeah, I would say that's actually very common among most people of religious sorts of any kind. Rune, um, thanks showing up. You High Tea, who's definitely been um, harping on me for my Hindu leanings. So High T's not even that religious of a Jew, but so like, I mean, God forbid, he's basically saying like, Duvid, I'm sorry, you're going to hell, even though he's probably hypocritical. So like, certainly like High T is probably not a good Jew, and even from his understanding of Judaism, he knows he's going to hell. But he just informed me, I know enough about Judaism to know that you can't do what you're doing and get away with it. You're going to hell. And so, I mean, that's pretty common. And, so some people, are more cautious in their speech, and they don't want people to get a bad feeling about the movement. And they're not going to tell you necessarily, or they might give you more politically correct understanding, or really, well, I'm not the judge. Like, well, there's what the literature says, but like, I'm not your judge. Like, if you're going to hell or not, or, what's going to happen to you after you die, what kind of reincarnation you're going to get. Like, I'm not the one who's going to be deciding that. But like, you want to know what the book says, this is what the book says. But even to focus on the positive aspects of what the book says, or to say, well, like, you should try doing at least a little. Whatever little you do will benefit you. Rather saying like, okay, like, the most common question I get asked is like, you're a Jew. Like, it can't be that like, you can't be a Jew and be doing this stuff. Like, the one thing I know about Judaism, 10 Commandments, idol worship, this is idol worship. What the hell? There's a problem here. And so like, everyone says that to me. Like, even at the temple, I got my yarmulke on, and people are like, you're a Jew. Like, what the hell are you doing here? Like, I know enough about Judaism that you don't belong here. Now, like Radhanath Swami, who became a guru and like doesn't know much about his Judaism, doesn't follow it. But like, I got a yarmulke on. I went to the top schools in Jerusalem, and like, every other person, even Indians, who don't, a lot of people think I'm Muslim. Like, how can you do both? And so I have other stuff, multiple truth hypothesis, and like the half Jew, and my other understandings. So I said, like, I've read more ISKCON literature than most initiated devotees have. And like, question, okay, Duvid's intellectual understanding of the philosophy, and even like, the Shish Delela, the Vedic cosmology, what got me interested, even say I was recruited. Duvid was recruited. Duvid's a high IQ person who studied physics in university, and high level ISKCON people recruited me. They wanted me to join because they knew I was smart. They knew I was academic. They knew I could read and understand this stuff, and especially the physics. I mentioned Gopal Krishna Goswami. You're saying I was personally recruited. I mean, okay, they recruit everybody, but in the sense, like people knew me, knew I was smart, and knew that I had a chance of understanding this stuff. And like the level, like, Krishna consciousness is about bhakti yoga, and bhakti yoga is love of God. So it's saying like, you could go back to Godhead, you could be a good devotee, you don't have to understand this stuff. You could chant, do your service, and never read most of these books. Certainly the stuff I mentioned about Vedic cosmology, the stuff I spoke about with Ashish Delela, I mentioned that in our conversation. You don't have to come onto this stuff, just like Kabbalah. Most Jews never study Kabbalah. You don't have to understand Kabbalah to be a good Jew. It's understood that like the biggest rabbis, they knew Kabbalah. Like, that's why they were the biggest rabbis. Although a lot of big rabbis didn't study Kabbalah, they accomplished a lot, either Rosh Hashiva or people that did a lot for the world. So like in ISKCON, there's a lot of like Jayapataka Goswami, who is not such a big scholar. Jayapataka Swami has the most disciples of any of Prabhupada's disciples, over 40,000 devotees. And I'm going to say he's a smart man. He took reasonably high birth. He's a blue-eyed man. His parents were wealthy. Like, he understands the philosophy, but he's not such a scholar. Like, he hasn't written so many books. And even to say, like, Duvid has read more books than Jayapataka Swami. I'm not saying, like, I mean, certainly he's read Bhagavatam. You say Bhagavad Gita, understands that exceptionally well, Prabhupada's philosophy, but he's not the biggest guru in ISKCON with the most disciples because he's a scholar and big genius. And, so there's different levels to, the scholar. Prabhupada loved scholarship. Prabhupada wrote, I understand, 30,000 pages. But translations, Prabhupada wrote 30,000 pages of literature. I showed Sri Nandana. Stephen Knapp, like, one of the first reasons I took ISKCON seriously is, I believe Stephen Knapp is I'm not sure if he's a college graduate or not. He was a hippie. I think he was an accountant, I think he did is a college graduate, but like Srinandan Das is not like a scholarly, educated type person. He was a hippie. He played the bass. He was trying to form a band. He may have went on to become an accountant, but Prabhupada turned him into an intellectual, and he wrote 30 books. Stephen Knapp has written over 10,000 pages of literature. He's a well-renowned, respected Hindu scholar. Prabhupada turned, like almost all of Prabhupada's major disciples went on to write books. Radhanath Swami, ironic, Radhanath Swami is the Jew, but he's a college dropout. Radhanath Swami has very little education. I mean, he comes from a relatively high birth Chicago Jewish family. His father, wasn't okay. Duvid comes from an educated Jewish family, like rabbis and doctors and people who, like my Jewish ancestors all had like PhD level education. Radhanath Swami's father was a used car salesman, was like a wealthy Jew. I don't know his father, maybe not had a college. I mean, he was supposed to go to college, but he's not educated, but he still wrote a book. He wrote 2 books. He wrote a best-selling book. And so even the uneducated Prabhupada disciples wrote books because Prabhupada valued education. And, saying I was recruited to ISKCON because I was at University of Michigan, because I was smart, because I was academic. They wanted people who were smart, who read, who were academic. They'll take everybody. Like the message is for everybody. And Prabhupada complains that he get third level people. Prabhupada, they recruited people on street corners. God forbid. I mentioned Thomas Dressler. This guy, God forbid, was a serial killer. According to his own book, he was a serial killer before he met Prabhupada. He had already killed multiple people before he ever heard of ISKCON in the Hare Krishna movement. And then, God forbid, when he became a Hare Krishna devotee, he went on and kept on killing people. But I mean, but saying they recruited people off the street and they took anybody. And like there's a lot of criminals and drug users and all types of people. When you preach on street corners, that's who you get. But Prabhupada loved educated people. I mentioned Sadaputa, Richard Thompson. He was one of Prabhupada's favorite disciples because he had a degree from Princeton. Bhakti Tirtha Goswami was African American. He went to an Ivy League school, Princeton, and Prabhupada loved him because he loved education, and so that level of scholarship. But I mean, the key is loving God. So you don't have to be a scholar. You don't have to be super smart or educated to be a good Hindu, or so I mean, it's interesting, like Church of Entropy, Team Up. Hindus generally respect education. Jews generally respect education, and so certainly in America, most Hindus are extremely educated. A joke. It's not even a joke that Hindus in America are wealthier than even the Jews. Per capita, on average, Hindus are wealthier than even the Jews because they respect education and they're academic, and they're reading, like regular Bible reading. There's literature, like ISKCON is like the Talmud, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srimad Bhagavatam. So like if you're a Jew, there's Daf Yomi. If you're an ISKCON devotee, you're expected to read and study Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita. Like even if anybody at ISKCON who doesn't like me or says I'm wrong, they would respect that I read these books because because Prabhupada was an academic. He turned average people into writers. He turned average people, like Gopal Krishna Goswami reads. Gopal Krishna Goswami carries books with him everywhere he's going. If you want to be a Gopal Krishna Goswami, disciple, you should be a reader, a person who spends your spare time reading, who carries books with you, who anytime you have a spare moment reads books. Although ISKCON is generally sectarian, where they would hold that truth is basically exclusively within these books. In a lot of ways, like Orthodox Hasidic Jews, like, okay, you need to make some money, you need to go out into the world and become successful. You could go to university, become an engineer, become a doctor, but there's not really the same type of truth that there is in the ISKCON books. And so Duvid's more like Freemasonic, not exclusive. I think there's truth everywhere. Orthodox Judaism, ISKCON is more exclusivist, and it's the nature. So that it is what it is. So just making the point, like if you want to be an ISKCON devotee, the type books that you should read, like I mentioned, um, Siddha Haridas. In India, people memorize this book. So if you're in India and you want to be a top ISKCON devotee, you should memorize this book, every word of it. And it's a good book. Like I think anybody would gain from reading this book. Like just the principles of good qualities and bad qualities. It's a lot of parallels to what I studied in Judaism: pure devotional service, purification of the heart, purification of deed, acquiring good qualities. But I would say if you're ISKCON, you want to move up in the ranks or be part of the society, you should memorize this book. If you're just someone who likes Duvid because you like multiculturalism, you like spirituality, you like understanding esoteric ideas, you might read the book. You don't need to memorize it. And there might be other books, like I said, most people in ISKCON never heard of this book. And I think this author even has a questionable status within the current politics of ISKCON. But this book, you may gain a lot more if you're just the guy who's interested in the gunas and the Hindu spiritual system of the three worlds of passion, ignorance, and goodness, and so various things. So usually what I tell people, a lot of people ask me, what book should I read? And generally, I said just start reading. Start reading. There's good books, there's bad books. Like in Judaism, I have some feel because like I studied in yeshiva and under some of the most famous rabbis in the world. And even ISKCON, I know a lot of the major gurus. They came to Detroit. I have my YouTube: Romapada Gopal Krishna Goswami, Radhanath Swami, Indradumna Swami. I mean, these are all gurus that I went to their events. Some of them I waited in line. I spoke with them, and I could tell you that like someone in ISKCON might tell you Duvid's wrong. He's not really a member. But no one in ISKCON is going to say, if Duvid told you that you should read this book, he's wrong. Everyone in ISKCON would agree that if Duvid told you to read this book, he's giving you good advice. And, so from that perspective, what you're going to do with it, you say, I think anybody would agree, like this information will make you a better person. I was watching this guy, Eli Stefanski, interview, and he's the most popular Daf Yomi class giver in English. People can look him up. Eli Stefanski is the most popular Talmud teacher in the world right now. And, is a businessman, multimillionaire, owns thousands of apartments, and, didn't train to be a rabbi, was a, the mainstream Jewish profession, a landlord, and then decided to start giving a Daf Yomi class, and he's the most popular Daf Yomi. But he said, you'll learn Talmud, it will improve your life in all aspects. It'll make you a better father, a better husband, a better Jew, a better person. God forbid, counter-Semites might disagree. That's what I do. I argue with counter-Semites, like one of my hobbies. But, in ISKCON, that's you're saying, this will make you a better person. It will make you love God more. Even Prabhupada said it itself. And, people ask, like, like from, when I met Tulsi Gabbard, and so like, I'm a Hasidic Jew and a Hare Krishna. And, first, like, yes, she agreed that, yes, you could be a Hasidic Jew and a Hare Krishna. There's no contradiction. And even, to some, okay, we get initiated, like, okay, Prabhupada didn't like beards, like, God forbid, they'd have to shave. Like, I'm not going to give up my beard. I'm a Hasidic Jew. But, that studying this wisdom will make you a better Jew, will make you a better Christian, will make you a better Hindu, will make you a better person, because it'll increase your spiritual, intellectual capacity, bhakti yoga. It will make you love God more. Like Graham Zweig, who was just debating T-Jump, and said, bhakti yoga is about love of God, and these teachings will make you love God more. And all of the attributes, like I showed some of these books, Satyarupa, the 26 qualities of a devotee. And there's a lot of books like this in Judaism, but the 26 qualities of a devotee: mercy, not defiant, truthful, equal to everyone, faultless, magnanimous, mild, clean, without material possessions, performs welfare work for everybody, peaceful, surrender, desireless, indifferent to material acquisitions, fixed, completely controls the six bad qualities, eats only as much as required, without inebriation, respectful, without false prestige, grave, compassionate, friend, poet, expert, silent. It also mentions like um, precious stones, like Duvid, from being being a Hasidic Jew, worked for world famous diamond dealer. Duvid, because I was a Hasidic Jew, it was work. I got paid, worked for a world famous diamond dealer who did business with Ivanka Trump's business partner. But in Krishna consciousness, one of the benefits of being a devotee of Krishna is expert of precious stones and metals. Some of the like side benefits, like you want, deity worship, um, and Krishna, deities for the best. And if you really want to be a good devotee, you need to understand precious metals and precious stones. Let alone like the character trait, character refinement, and like Jagaguru, Detroit ISKCON, say people like Prabhupada said, an expert in, Duva, the scientific expertise, we're going to train you up and you're going to be an expert. And, Prabhupada wanted people that were an expert in everything. And like Prabhupada made his own printing press. That's why I say writing. Prabhupada encouraged people to write. Prabhupada, one of the first things he did was, he was writing books, but he made his own printing press. He got encouraged people to make journals and periodicals and publish and various things. So I think I got 16 people watching. Haven't been streaming, that much recently. So try to think next week what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to do every Wednesday, 4:00. Try to keep this maybe a set time, Wednesdays at 4, where I'm going to do books that changed my life. And I might wait on Judaism. So I'm just Arbane is saying Krishna is a false god. Well, I mean, generally Judaism is exclusivist. So if you're talking like, um, like Jesus, like a view on Jesus, like Jesus is a false prophet, but it's saying okay, you could say that well, a lot of the teachings of Jesus are positive. So purely Jewish theology, you say like yeah, there's no Jew reject all idols, that Krishna could be God, that there are like demigods or forms, or worshiping morty idol forms is all contrary to Judaism. But to say that the teachings are that many of the teachings are positive or true, or that many of the aspects of Krishna consciousness would make you a better person, um, a lot of Jews would agree about it. And there's also a question about the Bhagavad Gita. Some Hasidic Jews believe that the Bhagavad Gita um, is godly in the wisdom on reincarnation. And even there's a verse in the Zohar that, but it's exclusivist in the way that Hasidic Kabbalists that believe that the Bhagavad Gita is a holy text doesn't believe that it comes from Krishna, believes that it comes from Abraham and the B'nai Keturah, or Abraham's descendants that were sent east. That so I mean Judaism, the exclusivist approach, even that validates the Bhagavad Gita as being a godly book and true, would still be exclusivist, saying because it really comes from Abraham and like the Aryan invasion theory. So Duvid has a more Freemasonic multiple truth approach. Oswald does this kind of think that Alan Watts, Huxley, Leary were overtype Westerners. So Prabhupada worked together with Allen Ginsberg. It was counterculture. And later, like I mentioned here, Prabhupada and his German disciples. So possibly Prabhupada later regretted having worked together with Allen Ginsberg, but Prabhupada worked together with everybody. And people that popularized Eastern concepts in the West, he worked together and appreciated what they did. But Prabhupada wasn't a degenerate. Prabhupada preached renunciation, traditional family values, abstinence, Prabhupada was anti homosexuality, was anti extramarital sexual relations, supported extreme amounts of renunciation. He thought the West was doomed due to being a loose, immoral place. And most of the people in the West, specifically like Allen Ginsberg, who, LSD and promiscuity, who helped Prabhupada significantly, popularizing Hare Krishna, even financially. Allen Ginsberg helped Prabhupada get his visa, donated money. Mantra Rock, the original programs in Haight Ashbury, in San Francisco, were put together with the help of Allen Ginsberg. But Allen Ginsberg was a degenerate, and I don't think Prabhupada, would have held punches and saying that, like, these guys are degenerates. But at the same time, he respected that, the Western system in general, if they were vegetarian or they recognized, the power of the Vedas to so just like ISKCON, I say, like, they'll work together with anybody. You go into the temple, you could chant, you could, they'll feed you prasad, you could, even, try to, join the movement and become part of it. But, the personal opinion, like, they're saying Prabhupada did not hold punches about sinful behavior and did not excuse sinful behavior for people that did a lot of good, and, from his understanding of doing a lot of good. Allen Ginsberg, Alan Watts is also, I don't know if Prabhupada met or worked together with Alan Watts, but Alan Watts is also popularizer of Hinduism in the West, that a lot of people that came, just like, I showed, Paramahamsa Yogananda. George Harrison, when he donated the book, the Krishna book, also, George Harrison wanted to include a statement about Paramahamsa Yogananda, and they had to go to Prabhupada to extreme lengths to not lose the support of George Harrison, and due to his love of Paramahamsa Yogananda. If you read the biographies of a lot of the people, probably half of the first people that came on to Prabhupada in like his days in the 60s, I don't know how popular, maybe today people haven't even heard of the, autobiography of Yogi Paramahamsa Yogananda. But in the 60s, almost everybody that came on to Prabhupada first mentions that they read this book. And, so Prabhupada, okay, like, he went to Scottish Church College, he was familiar, he, denounced it, because this was Mayavadism, wasn't true Hinduism. And yeah, I talked about Vivekananda, and, Vivekananda also, Prabhupada, if you read Prabhupada's conversations with Indians in India or Hindus, like, half of it's about Vivekananda and Gandhi. And, like, Prabhupada is not a big fan of Vivekananda. However, he laid the groundwork for Hinduism, for Prabhupada to come to America. Prabhupada walks in the steps of Vivekananda. However, he's teaching a different game, and he, so to say, was much more orthodox in terms of his belief and structure than Vivekananda. Although, he draws upon them. And it's interesting, is that I mentioned when I was showing the book about Father Ukart in Scottish Church College, that Prabhupada went to Scottish Church College, just like Paramahamsa Yogananda and just like Vivekananda. So it's pretty interesting on that level. But, like, generally, people are interested in India, Hinduism, and yoga and various philosophies, like, but ISKCON's more exclusivist. It's like yoga. Like, you could do yoga events, chanting, and ISKCON will have much more success at yoga events than at Christian events, because there's a lot of prejudice or group strategy, and it's almost unthinkable for a Westerner to convert to Hinduism. But if the person's already doing yoga, they're much more likely that they're going to join ISKCON than if they're not doing yoga. However, Prabhupada's not about like hatha yoga, and if you ask about like the gurus or various things, he had Prabhupada used stark language, and he would be like rascals and liars and very strong language, because he held that like it was like Reform Judaism, like like that there's a truth, and these guys are bending the truth, and that's why it was um, Bhagavad Gita as it is. He wasn't giving a watered down version; he's giving it as it is. And so Prabhupada, would talk about the destruction of the West, the war on the West. Even today, like, okay, most ISKCON people want to come to the West. They want what the West has. They want to economically get ahead and, have a more watered down. But if you actually read Prabhupada in the 60s, he would talk about the war on the West and the destruction of the West and the bad karma of the West for, what we did to India. So it was, much more strong in the sense like this is God's word. He wasn't scared to say it. He wasn't scared to say that these people were frauds and these people were against the teachings. That's, Prabhupada was fearless, and Prabhupada spoke extremely strongly and said very negative things about really everybody. Prabhupada condemned the West. He condemned his fellow Hindus. He condemned everybody because he's like, this is the truth. This is the way it is. This is what he's trying to spread, and he didn't want half measures. Although, some levels he did go for half measure. He did what he had to do. Like the role of women. Most of his initiates were degenerates and drug addicts and hippies and criminals. Like, God forbid, reading, like Mother Malati, Shamachandra, like people write it in his own book. Shamachandra, like Prabhupada's disciple, Mother Malati's husband, top devotee, was a degenerate. He was a thief and a drug dealer and a degenerate. But Prabhupada saved his life and turned him into a conservative. There's even Prabhupada himself, like Prabhupada's most famous, for his relationship with the Beatles, and Prabhupada talks about regretting working together with the Beatles, that the Beatles were degenerates, even though, like it was, okay, I mentioned Paramahamsa Yogananda, but most of the early devotees of ISKCON were interested in ISKCON because of the Beatles, and they heard My Sweet Lord and the Hare Krishna tape that they produced at Apple Record together with the Beatles, and the Beatles were pro ISKCON, like John Lennon. All we were saying, you give peace a chance, Hare Krishnas and the various references. Prabhupada, towards the end of his life, questioned whether it was worth his while to work together with the Beatles because they were degenerates, the Beatles, God forbid. And the Beatles were pretty conservative, talked about it, like relatively in the music. Prabhupada got out, stopped working with John Lennon. Prabhupada was living with John Lennon in Cadbury Castle. And he got out of there because he's like, this guy's a degenerate. God forbid, John Lennon had naked pictures of himself and Yoko Ono all over the walls, and Prabhupada was like, this guy's a degenerate. We're out of here. Even though almost, like in the early days, like 75% of the people who joined Hare Krishna did it because of the Beatles. Prabhupada wasn't scared to say, this guy John Lennon's a degenerate. And so in that respect, like Prabhupada was fire. He was fearless. He called it like he seed it. And also like about the West, Prabhupada would talk about the destruction of the West and, various factors. He called it like he saw it. And a lot of people like ISKCON, they don't even know this. They haven't read the literature. They haven't looked at, they might have read Prabhupada's literature, but they haven't heard his speeches and has talked to people that knew he was so fierce and so would have talked about things like the destruction of the West, like would have referred to people as degenerates. But that sense, Prabhupada, there aren't people really like today, like almost like Westboro Baptist Church style. In that, but Prabhupada was compassionate, like Westboro Baptist Church style. In a sense, Prabhupada had a level to him where he was even more intense than the Westboro Baptist Church. Like, you're going to hell, you're a degenerate. I'm sorry. But he was also compassionate. He would cook. He would feed people. He would chant with people. It was inclusive, believed in the power of people to change. And he proved himself by taking third-rate people and turning him into, like Sri Nandana. He was a hippie. He was a bass player. And now he's written 25 books. Mother Malti was a thief and a drug dealer. And, he turned her around. God forbid. was a serial killer, killing for Krishna, God forbid, Radhanath Swami, Radhanath Swami traveled together with Thomas Dressler, who was a serial killer, literally a serial killer. But Prabhupada he took him, he accepted him, and turned him into a devotee. And God forbid, this serial killer started killing people for ISKCON. He started killing people for Kirtananda Swami. Like he was a serial killer before he met ISKCON, and then when he became a devotee, he started killing people on behalf of ISKCON. And but I'm saying that was the time in the '60s of who was around and who people were recruiting. By saying, okay, like Thomas Dresser was a Prabhupada uh, disciple. I mean, he became a devotee because Prabhupada accepted everybody. Prabhupada loved Richard Thompson. Prabhupada liked elites. Like relatively, he accepted everybody. But if you read the literature, Prabhupada favored elites. He liked rich people, powerful people, people who went to good schools, people had positions of power and money and education, especially. But he accepted everybody. And due to the times in the '60s and the nature, most of the people he got were lowlifes. And a lot of the people that why Prabhupada? Because he was able to take these lowlifes and turn them into great devotees. But Prabhupada liked taking, he preferred, to recruit elites. Ramapada comes to University of Michigan. He prefers speaking at universities to students that read and are intellectual. Saying like Prabhupada went to MIT and Harvard and university. Prabhupada preferred speaking at universities. He would speak to hippies. He would take people off the street corners and drug dealers. And his biggest events, biggest successes were with the Beatles and Allen Ginsberg. But Prabhupada's preference was to speak at universities, although he spoke to everybody. So, a little bit of a ramble there. So, thank God. Hare Krishna, blessings next week. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll do business books next week, economics. So maybe I'll do recommendations for business economic books, or maybe I'll do World War II and the Holocaust, God forbid. So I'm going to try every Wednesday, 4 p.m. I also have a big section of construction, civil engineering, what I studied academically, civil engineering. So I'm not quite sure yet what I'm going to do next week, but tune in next week, 4 p.m. And I'll do my next series of books. Yeah, I keep. I don't have Spengler's book actually. I've read some of Spengler. I have Quigley. Um, Quigley. Tragedy and Hope. So I've read some of Spengler, but I would put Spengler with together. I mean, he's not really like World War II and Holocaust, but like on my shelf, if I had to put Spengler somewhere, I would probably put him with my World War II and Holocaust stuff. But I don't actually own any Spengler books. So I've read a few hundred pages of his material in various sources online. But I have Tragedy and Hope, Quigley, together with Holocaust. But I only have two shelves on the Holocaust books. Also, although I've read probably 2 or 3 times what I own and stuff online. So signing off. God bless. Have a great week. See you next week, Wednesday. Charles Moskowitz, probably tomorrow at 3. See, maybe talk with Luke. If anyone saw, I was on, Ben Thorpe the other day, with Grace Thorpe and a panel, interesting thing talking about relationships and marriage and debating whether relationships are transactional. So I know Ben Thorpe, he may even be streaming now, is talking about E. Michael Jones with one of his students. So it's possible I pop onto that. Sunday week in review. Now Duvid's doing Monday mob talk with John Wolfe. God forbid, Duvid's getting more into the streaming. I took myself off the chess server. Spend too much time playing chess. So John Wolfe, he is here. So I'm just finishing John. But I was just plugging our show. 2 o'clock next week, Wednesday, mob talk with John Wolfe and Duvid on his channel. Can't risk Duvid's channel with mob talk, although it was pretty clean and but So on John Wolf's channel, we're next week, Monday, 2 o'clock Mob Talk. And then Wednesdays, I'm going to be doing these books that changed my life. Thursdays, Charles Moskowitz, and we'll see Luke Ford. I was on Monday, so maybe election. So maybe later today we'll see. Ben Thorpe also possibly. I'll even pop on later, but try working together, network with him, and Church of Entropy. And I set the goal. Me and Church of Entropy will meet in person in Sicily, Italy, at the end of May next year. Next year in May for the Science of Consciousness conference. So, God bless. Have a great week, and Hare Krishna.